Okay, good morning, guys. I am reading from You Are The Placebo by Dr. Joe Dispenza today. I'm going to read chapter 2. It's called A Brief History of the Placebo. As the saying goes, desperate times call for desperate measures. When Harvard-educated American surgeon Henry Beecher was serving in World War II, he ran out of morphine. Near the end of the war, morphine was in short supply in military field hospitals. So this situation wasn't uncommon. At the time, Beecher was about to operate on a badly wounded soldier. He was afraid that without a painkiller, the soldier might go into fatal cardiovascular shock. What happened next astounded him. Without skipping a beat, one of the nurses filled a syringe with saline and gave the soldier a shot, just as if she were injecting him with morphine. The soldier calmed down right away. He reacted as though he'd actually received the drug, even though all he'd received was a squirt of salt water. Beecher went ahead with the operation, cutting into the soldier's flesh, making what repairs were necessary, and sewing him back up, all without anesthesia. The soldier felt little pain and did not go into shock. How could it be, Beecher wondered, that salt water could stand in for morphine? After that stunning success, whenever the field hospital ran out of morphine, Beecher did the same thing again, injected saline, just as if he were injecting morphine. The experience convinced him of the power of placebos, and when he returned to the United States after the war, he began to study the phenomenon. In 1955, Beecher made history when he authored a clinical review of 15 studies published by the Journal of the American Medical Association that not only discussed the huge significance of placebos, but also called for a new model of medical research that would randomly assign subjects to receive active medications or placebos, what we now refer to as randomized controlled trials, so that this powerful placebo effect wouldn't distort results. The idea that we can alter physical reality through thought, belief, and expectation alone, whether we are fully aware of what we're doing or not, certainly didn't start in that World War II field hospital. The Bible is filled with stories of miraculous healings. And even in modern times, people regularly flock to places such as Lourdes in southern France, where a 15-year-old peasant girl named Bernadette had a vision of the Virgin Mary in 1858, leaving behind their crutches, braces, and wheelchairs as proof that they've been healed. Similar miracles also have been reported in Fatima, Portugal, where 3 shepherd children saw an apparition of the Virgin Mary in 1917, and in connection with a traveling statue of Mary carved for the 30th anniversary of the apparition. The statue was based on the description given by the oldest of the 3 children, who by then had become a nun, and it was blessed by Pope Pius XII before it was sent traveling around the world. Faith healing is certainly not confined to the Christian tradition. The late Indian guru Satya Sai Baba, widely considered by his followers to be an avatar, a manifestation of a deity, was known to manifest holy ash called vibhuti from the palms of his hands. This fine gray ash has been said to have the power to heal many physical, mental, and spiritual ills when either eaten or applied to the skin as a paste. Tibetan lamas are also said to have healing powers, using their breath to heal by blowing on the sick. Even French and English kings reigning between the 4th and 9th centuries used the laying on of hands to cure their subjects. King Charles II of England was known to be particularly adept at this, performing the practice about 100,000 times. What is it that causes such so-called miraculous events? Whether the instrument of healing is faith in a deity alone, or belief in the extraordinary powers of a person, an object, or even a place deemed sacred or holy. What is the process by which faith and belief can bring about such profound effects? Might how we assign meaning to a ritual, Whether that ritual is saying the rosary, rubbing a pinch of holy ash onto our skin, or taking a numerical drug prescribed by a trusted physician, play a role in the placebo phenomenon? What if the internal state of mind of the people who receive these cures was influenced or altered by the conditions in their external environment, a person, place, or thing at the proper time, to such a degree that their new state of mind could actually affect real physical changes? From magnetism to hypnotism. In the 1770s, Viennese physician Franz Anton Mesmer made quite a name for himself by developing and demonstrating what was considered at that time a medical model of miraculous healing. Expanding on an idea of Sir Isaac Newton's about the effect of planetary gravitation on the human body, Mesmer came to believe that the body contained an invisible fluid that could be manipulated to heal people using a force he called animal magnetism. His technique involved asking his patients to look deeply into his eyes before moving magnets over their bodies to direct and balance this magnetic fluid. Later, he found that he could wave his hands without the magnets to produce the same effect. Soon after each session began, his patients would start trembling and twitching before going into convulsions that Mesmer considered therapeutic. Mesmer would continue the fluid balancing until they were calm again. He used this technique to heal a variety of maladies, from serious conditions like paralysis and convulsive disorders, to more minor difficulties such as menstrual problems and hemorrhoids. In what became his most famous case, Mesmer partially cured teenage concert pianist Maria Theresa von Paradis of hysterical blindness, a psychosomatic condition she'd had since about the age of 3. She stayed in Mesmer's home for weeks as he worked with her and finally helped her to be able to perceive motion and even distinguish color. But her parents were less than overjoyed by her progress because they stood to lose a royal pension if their daughter was cured. In addition, as her sight returned, her piano playing deteriorated because she now was able to watch her fingers on the keyboard. Rumors, never substantiated, began circulating that Mesmer's relationship to the pianist was improper. Her parents forcibly removed her from Mesmer's house. Her blindness returned, and Mesmer's reputation diminished considerably. Armand Marie Jacques de Chastanet, a French aristocrat known as the Marquis de Puységur, observed Mesmer and took his ideas to the next level. Puységur would induce a deep state that he called magnetic somnambulism, similar to sleepwalking, in which his subjects had access to deep thoughts and even intuitions about their health and that of others. In this state, they were extremely suggestible and would follow instructions, although they had no memory of what happened once they came out of it. Whereas Mesmer thought that the power was in the practitioner over the subject, Puységur believed that the power was in the thought of the subject, directed by the practitioner, over his or her own body. This was perhaps one of the first therapeutic attempts to explore the mind-body relationship. In the 1800s, Scottish surgeon James Braid took the idea of mesmerism still further, developing a concept he called neuropnetism, what we now know as hypnotism. Braid became intrigued by the idea when one day he arrived late for an appointment, only to find his waiting patient calmly staring in intense fascination at the flickering flame of an oil lamp. Braid found the patient to be in an extremely suggestible state as long as his attention remained so locked, thereby fatiguing certain parts of his brain. After many experiments, Braid learned to get his subjects to concentrate on a single idea while staring at an object, which put them into a similar trance that he felt he could use to cure their disorders. including chronic rheumatoid arthritis, sensory impairment, and the various complications of spinal injuries and stroke. Braid's book, Neuropnology, details many of his successes, including the story of how he cured both a 33-year-old woman whose legs were paralyzed and a 54-year-old woman with a skin disorder and severe headaches. Then esteemed French neurologist Jean-Martin Charcot weighed in on Braid's work, claiming that the ability to go into such a trance was possible only in those suffering from the condition of hysteria, which he considered an inherited neurological disorder that was irreversible. He used hypnosis not to cure patients, but to study their symptoms. Finally, a rival of Charcot's, a doctor named Hippolyte Bernheim at the University of Nancy, insisted that the suggestibility so central to hypnotism was not confined to hysterics, but was a natural condition for all humans. He implanted ideas in subjects, telling them that when they awoke from their trance, they would feel better and their symptoms would disappear. Thus, he used the power of suggestion as a therapeutic tool. Bernheim's work continued into the early 1900s. Although each of these early explorers of suggestibility had a slightly different focus and technique, they were all able to help hundreds and hundreds of people heal a wide variety of physical and mental problems by changing their minds about their maladies and about how those illnesses were expressed in their bodies. During the first two world wars, military doctors, most notably Army psychiatrist Benjamin Simon, used the concept of hypnotic suggestibility, which I'll discuss further later, to help returning soldiers who suffered from the trauma that was first labeled shell shock, but is now known as post-traumatic stress disorder. These veterans had suffered through such horrible war experiences that many of them numbed themselves to their emotions as a form of self-preservation, developed amnesia surrounding the horrific events, or, worse, kept reliving their experiences in flashbacks, all of which can cause stress-induced physical illness. Simon and his colleagues found hypnosis extremely useful for helping the veterans face their traumas and cope with them so that they wouldn't have to resurface as anxiety and physical ailments, including nausea, high blood pressure, and other cardiovascular disorders, and even suppressed immunity. Like those practitioners in the century before them, Army doctors employing hypnosis helped their patients alter their patterns of thinking in order to get well and reclaim their mental and physical health. These hypnosis techniques were so successful that civilian doctors also became interested in using suggestibility. Although many did so not by putting their patients into a trance, but by occasionally giving them sugar pills and other placebos and telling them that these drugs would make them better. The patients often did get better, responding to suggestibility in the same way that Beecher's wounded soldiers responded to the belief that they were receiving shots of morphine. This was, in fact, Beecher's era, and after he wrote his groundbreaking 1955 review calling for the use of randomized controlled trials with placebos for testing drugs, the placebo became a serious part of medical research. Beecher's point was well taken. Initially, researchers expected that a study's control group, the group taking the placebo, would remain neutral so that comparisons between the control group and the group taking the active treatment would show how well the active treatment worked. But in so many studies, the control group was indeed getting better, not just on their own, but because of their expectation and belief that they might be taking a drug or receiving a treatment that would help them. The placebo itself might have been inert, but its effect was certainly not. And these beliefs and expectations were proving to be extremely powerful. So somehow that effect had to be teased out from the data if that data was to have any real meaning. To that end, and heeding Beecher's petition, researchers began making the randomized double-blind trial the norm, randomly assigning subjects to either the active or the placebo group and making sure none of the subjects or any of the researchers themselves knew who was taking the real drug and who was taking the placebo. This way, the placebo effect would be equally active in each group, and any possibility that the researchers might treat subjects differently according to what group they were in would be eliminated. These days, studies are sometimes even triple blind, meaning that not only are the participants and the researchers who are conducting the trial in the dark about who's taking what until the end of the study, but the statisticians analyzing the data also don't know until their job is done. Exploring the nocebo effect. Of course, there's always a flip side. While suggestibility was garnering more attention because of its ability to heal, it also became apparent that the same phenomenon could be used to harm. Such practices as hexes and voodoo curses illustrated the negative side of suggestibility. In the 1940s, Harvard physiologist Walter Bradford Cannon, who had in 1932 coined the term fight or flight, studied the ultimate nocebo response, a phenomenon that he called voodoo death. Cannon examined a number of anecdotal reports of people with strong cultural beliefs in the power of witch doctors or voodoo priests suddenly falling ill and dying, despite no apparent injury or evidence of poison or infection, after ending up on the receiving end of a hex or curse. His research laid the groundwork for much of what we know today about how physiological response systems enable emotions, fear in particular, to create illness. The victim's belief in the power of the curse itself to kill him was only part of the psychological soup that brought about his ultimate demise, Cannon said. Another factor was the effect of being socially ostracized and rejected, even by the victim's own family. Such people quickly became the walking dead. Harmful effects from harmless sources aren't restricted to voodoo, of course. Scientists in the 1960s coined the term nocebo, Latin for I shall harm, as opposed to I shall please, the Latin translation of placebo, referring to an inert substance that causes a harmful effect, simply because someone believes or expects it will harm her. The nocebo effect commonly pops up in drug studies when subjects who are taking placebos either just expect that there will be side effects to the drug being tested, or when the subjects are specifically warned of potential side effects. And then they experience those same side effects by associating the thought of the drug with all of the potential causations, even though they've not taken the drug. For obvious ethical reasons, few studies are designed specifically to look at this phenomenon, although some do exist. A famous example is a 1962 study done in Japan with a group of children who were all extremely allergic to poison ivy. Researchers rubbed one forearm of each child with a poison ivy leaf, but told them the leaf was harmless. As a control, they rubbed the child's other forearm with a harmless leaf that they claimed was poison ivy. All the children developed a rash on the arm rubbed with the harmless leaf that was thought to be poison ivy. And 11 of the 13 children developed no rash at all where the poison had actually touched them. This was an astounding finding. How could children who were highly allergic to poison ivy not get a rash when exposed to it? And how could they develop a rash from a totally benign leaf? The new thought that the leaf wouldn't hurt them overrode their memory and belief that they were allergic to it, rendering real poison ivy harmless. And the reverse was true in the second part of the experiment. A harmless leaf was made toxic by thought alone. In both cases, it seemed as if the children's bodies instantaneously responded to a new mind. In this instance, we could say that the children were somehow freed from the future expectation of a physical reaction to the toxic leaf, based on their past experiences of being allergic. In effect, they somehow transcended a predictable line of time. This also suggests that by some means they became greater than the conditions in their environment, the poison ivy leaf. Finally, the children were able to alter and control their physiology by simply changing a thought. This astonishing evidence that thought, in the form of expectation, could have a greater effect on the body than the real physical environment helped to usher in a new era of scientific study called psychoneuroimmunology. The effect of thoughts and emotions on the immune system, an important segment of the mind-body connection. Another notable nocebo study from the 60s looked at people with asthma. Researchers gave 40 asthma patients inhalers containing nothing but water vapor, although they told the subjects that the inhalers contained an allergen or irritant. 19 of them, 48%, experienced asthmatic symptoms such as restriction of their airways, with 12, 30% of the group suffering full-blown asthmatic attacks. Researchers then gave the subjects inhalers said to contain medicine that would relieve their symptoms, and in each case, their airways did indeed open back up. Although again, the inhalers contained only water vapor. In both situations, bringing on the asthma symptoms and then dramatically reversing them, the patients were responding to suggestion alone, the thought planted in their minds by the researchers which played out exactly as they expected. They were harmed when they thought they'd inhaled something harmful, and they got better when they thought they were receiving medicine. And these thoughts were greater than their environment, greater than reality. We could say that their thoughts created a brand new reality. What does this say about the beliefs we hold and the thoughts we think every day? Are we more susceptible to catching the flu because all winter long, everywhere we look, we see articles about flu season and signs about flu shot availability, all of which reminds us that if we don't get a flu shot, we'll get sick? Could it be that when we simply see someone with flu-like symptoms, we become ill from thinking in the same ways as the children in the poison ivy study who got a rash from the inert leaf, or from thinking like the asthmatics who experienced a significant bronchial reaction after inhaling simple water vapor? Are we more likely to suffer from arthritis, stiff joints, poor memory, flagging energy, and decreased sex drive as we age, simply because that's the version of the truth that ads, commercials, television shows, and media reports bombard us with? What other self-fulfilling prophecies are we creating in our minds without being aware of what we're doing? And what inevitable truths can we successfully reverse simply through thinking new thoughts and choosing new beliefs? The first big breakthroughs. A groundbreaking study in the late 70s showed for the first time that a placebo could trigger the release of endorphins, the body's natural painkillers, just as certain active drugs do. In the study, John Levine, MD, PhD, of the University of California, San Francisco, gave placebos instead of pain medication to 40 dental patients who had just had their wisdom teeth removed. Not surprisingly, because the patients thought they were getting medicine that would indeed relieve their pain, most reported relief. But then the researchers gave the patients an antidote to morphine called naloxone, which chemically blocks the receptor sites for both morphine and endorphins, endogenous morphine, in the brain. When the researchers administered it, the patient's pain returned. This proved that by taking the placebos, the patients have been creating their own endorphins, their own natural pain relievers. It was a milestone in placebo research because it meant that the relief the study subjects experienced wasn't all in their minds. It was in their minds and their bodies, in their state of being. If the human body can act like its own pharmacy, producing its own pain drugs, then might it not also be true that it's fully capable of dispensing other natural drugs when they're needed from the infinite blend of chemicals and healing compounds it houses? Drugs that act just like the ones doctors prescribe, or maybe even better than the drugs doctors prescribe? Another study in the 70s, this one by psychologist Robert Ader, PhD, at the University of Rochester, added a fascinating new dimension to the placebo discussion: the element of conditioning. Conditioning, an idea made famous by Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov, depends on associating one thing with another. Like Pavlov's dogs associating the sound of the bell with food after Pavlov started ringing it every day before he fed them. In time, the dogs were conditioned to automatically salivate in anticipation of a meal whenever they heard a bell. As a result of this type of conditioning, their bodies became trained to physiologically respond to a new stimulus in the environment, in this case, the bell, even without the original stimulus that elicited the response, the food, being present. Therefore, in a conditioned response, we could say that a subconscious program, which is housed in the body, I'll talk more about this in the coming chapters, seemingly overrides the conscious mind and takes charge. In this way, the body is actually conditioned through repeated past experiences to become the mind, and conscious thought is no longer totally in control. In the case of Pavlov, the dogs were repeatedly exposed to the smell, sight, and taste of the food, and then Pavlov rang a bell. Over time, just the sound of the bell caused the dogs to automatically change their physiological and chemical state without thinking about it consciously. Their autonomic nervous system, the body's subconscious system that operates below conscious awareness, took over. So conditioning creates subconscious internal changes in the body by associating past memories with the expectation of internal effects, what we call associative memory, until those expected or anticipated end results automatically occur. The stronger the conditioning, the less conscious control we have over these processes, and the more automatic the subconscious programming becomes. Ader started out attempting to study how long such conditioned responses could be expected to last. He fed lab rats saccharin-sweetened water that he'd spiked with a drug called cyclophosphamide, which causes stomach pain. After conditioning the rats to associate the sweet taste of the water with the ache in their gut, he expected they'd soon refuse to drink the spiked water. His intention was to see how long they'd continue to refuse the water so that he could measure the amount of time their conditioned response to the sweet water would last. But what Ader didn't know initially was that the cyclophosphamide also suppresses the immune system. So he was surprised when his rats started unexpectedly dying from bacterial and viral infections. Changing gears in his research, he continued to give the rats saccharin water, force-feeding them with an eyedropper, but without the cyclophosphamide. Although they were no longer receiving the immune-suppressing drug, the rats continued to die of infections, while the control group that had received only the sweetened water all along continued to be fine. Teaming up with University of Rochester immunologist Nicholas Cohen, PhD, Ader further discovered that when the rats had been conditioned to associate the taste of the sweetened water with the effect of the immune-suppressing drug, the association was so strong that just drinking the sweetened water alone produced the same physiological effect as the drug, signaling the nervous system to suppress the immune system. Like Sam Blondie, whose story was in Chapter 1, Ader's rats died by thought alone. Researchers were beginning to see that the mind was clearly able to subconsciously activate the body in several powerful ways they never imagined. I'm going to stop there and I'll continue chapter 2 in the next video. So if you enjoyed that, it just gets better.